Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I'm a model, and I was doing work for a catalog out of state. During our break, I stated that I was going to walk back to the hotel to get my charger, since it was only a block away. One of the video crew offered to walk with me, as he had something he wanted to grab from the hotel too. We got to the hotel with no problems, but I left the hotel alone. As soon as I walked out the door, a man approached me and said, "I saw you walking earlier." He and I had been in the hotel for about 20 minutes, which means he followed us to the hotel and had been waiting for me. He continued to walk with me and asking me all kinds of personal questions. I tried to politely get out of the conversation by telling him that I have to go to work and that I couldn't talk right now. But he continued to follow me and ask me questions the whole way back to where I was shooting. When I got there, he asked me to come swimming in the river with him. I told him that I couldn't because I have to work. I was afraid to be stern or tell him to F off because I have heard of too many stories of men like this becoming violent in that situation. I did start feeling nervous as I tried to open the door to the building because he followed me and he was standing right behind me. The door was locked. I started running around to every door, trying desperately to get inside as he followed me to every door. They were all locked. Now I'm really in a panic. But then a car with 2 girls inside pulled over and then called me to come to their car. I ran over and he immediately booked it down the street and disappeared. The girls told me that they saw what happened and asked me if I needed a ride. I explained that I just needed to call someone to get inside and that it seemed that he was gone now. I got on the phone with another model and she was on her way to open the door. I told the girls that I was okay now and that he was gone and someone was on their way. But as soon as the girls drove away, the man appeared from around the corner of the street that he left down. He had been watching and waiting for them to leave, and he was walking very fast towards me. I ran up the stairs and I started banging on the door, desperate to get in. He started coming up the stairs after me, and when the door finally opened, I then went inside and I closed it fast behind me. And needless to say, I was shaken. I never feel safe when I walk anywhere now, no matter how short the distance would be. Even walking across a parking lot is a stressful experience. When I was a kid, probably around 6 years old, I had a summer experience that still sends shivers down my spine. It was one of those events that happened quickly and could have been much worse, but it taught me one hell of a lesson by the end of it. I remember that it was a really hot day, the kind where the air does that fun shimmering off the asphalt, and I was home with my mom. She was a teacher at my school and we were both on our break. We were spending some time in the backyard. My mom was inflating and then filling up the little pool that my dad had bought the weekend before, and I was just excitedly running around, waiting to jump in the water. My mom told me to go inside and get us a couple of popsicles, and I excitedly did what she requested. I was digging in the freezer for a specific flavor, blue raspberry of course, and enjoying the cold air blasting in my face, when I heard it, a light knock at the door. We didn't really get a lot of visitors where we lived, usually just my grandparents or our neighbor, Miss Shelley, whom I absolutely adored. Thinking that it was probably Grandma or Miss Shelley, I went over and I swung the door open, expecting to be greeted by her warm smile and some cookies. But instead, there was a man standing there, a stranger, with a creepy yellow grin that seemed to be way too big for his face. I may have been 6 years old, but I cannot forget that face. The smell hit me next, a sour stench that made my nose scrunch up. I didn't know it then, but as an adult, I now realize that it was probably the stink of some kind of booze. I bluntly asked this guy who he was, and he laughed and responded that he was a friend and that he was there to see me. I was a pretty social kid, so I just assumed that he was a friend of my parents that I hadn't met yet. When I asked him how he knew me, he leaned down, laughed, and then said, "Huh, I've known you for a long, long time. I was there when you were born." It was a weird thing to say, but at that age, I didn't really question it. He then followed this up with a, "Hey, why don't you come outside? I brought lunch for us. You like pizza, right?" I did like pizza. In fact, I love pizza. And with the word pizza mentioned, I now really wanted pizza. I started to step outside, but just as I did, my mom appeared at the front door and put a hand on my shoulder. She asked this man who he was and what he wanted. I remember him flashing that ugly yellow smile at her and asking for someone named Melissa. My mom, clearly not convinced, told him, "No one named Melissa lives here. I think you need to leave." He responded with an, "Oh, of course, my mistake," still holding that creepy smile, and then turned to walk off. Without saying another word, he walked out our front gate, got into an old minivan, and then drove away. My mom immediately pulled me back in the house, and that's when I got my first lesson about stranger danger. She explained that we should never trust people who we don't know like that, especially if they're asking us to go somewhere with them. I mentioned that he said he was a friend and that he was there when I was born. And she told me that none of that was true and that sometimes people will lie to us to get us to trust them. Now, looking back as an adult, I realized just how close I came to a potentially dangerous situation. If my mom hadn't come inside to check on me when she did, well, I really don't like to think about what would have happened. It's a really chilling reminder of how important it is to teach kids about the dangers of trusting strangers. And it's a lesson that I've held closely ever since. I use this story to actually explain to my own son about stranger danger. I never saw that guy again, thankfully. And I hope that I never do. I, a 25-year-old female, had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was dogger house sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a backpacking trip. He is 26 and male. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few arches of property. He's right next to the highway, which has a opposite to us, a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves, and there are lots of abandoned or dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood, I may say. So, I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog / English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he has become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating and the other one is not. Because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own. So I usually lock Lottie alone, then go back and get Hennessy to walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older run-down home. I instantly thought that the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at that time. I forced myself to brush it off as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading Let's Not Meet stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and I noticed that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking the 30-odd foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around. But now, being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that that was the end of it. It was not. Moments after that I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no people on my door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side since it's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice that said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy to me. It was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he'd rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No," and I asked him to please go away. He paused for another second and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. And by this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up and he's mashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and I grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me, and he's still barking and going crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog and I yelled out to him to leave. He paused and then slammed into my door. I say the door moved and at that moment, I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point and my hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps toward the man. While this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in and I called the cops to tell him what had happened. I never got a good look at the guy and they basically told me that there wasn't anything that I could really do, but they did take my statement and told me that they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I'm so thankful for Hennessy. After all of that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night, and I cried because it had all hit me on how terrifying that was. I literally went out the next day, and I bought him the biggest bone that I could find from a pet store nearly an hour away because he earned it. Of course, I got Lottie something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had two dogs barking inside. But my assumption is that he didn't realize he was hearing two barks, or assumed that if I had two dogs, they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say, he was not afraid. I am so thankful the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have just called the cops and kept my door closed. But I hope that maybe he saw Hennessy. He'll know not to come back and mess with us, because if he does, I'll let my big sweet boy rip his arm off. My name is Lisa, and this is Mandy's story as she told it to me. And don't worry, I got her permission to share this on here. Mandy and I have been best friends since elementary school. We're both 16 years old, and we go to the same high school. We practically do everything together. We study, hang out, even plan our future college adventures. Mandy is the kind of friend everyone wishes they had. She's very kind and funny, and she's always there when you need her. We trust each other with our deepest secrets, and we support each other through thick and thin. Last summer, Mandy went on a vacation to a small beach town with her family. Her family has been going to this town every year for as long as she can remember. It's a tradition they cherish. Mandy loves the beach and the sounds of the waves and the smell of the ocean and the feel of the sand between her toes. Let's just say it's her happy place. It's her sanctuary away from the stresses of school and her everyday life. Her family usually rents a small cottage near the beach. The town is quaint, with friendly locals and a relaxed vibe. Mandy always looks forward to these trips. She spends her days swimming, sunbathing, and reading her favorite books. It's a time for her to just unwind and recharge, you know. On one particular day during the vacation, Mandy decided to spend the afternoon alone at the beach. She asked her mom if she could go, and her mom agreed, just reminding her to stay safe and return home before dinner. Mandy packed her beach bag with a towel, some sunscreen, and a book, and then she headed out. The beach was nearly deserted, which was typical for that time of day. Most families were either at lunch or taking an afternoon siesta. So Mandy found a quiet spot, laid out her towel, and then settled in to enjoy the sun. She applied sunscreen and then laid back, closing her eyes to soak up the warmth around her. The rhythmic sound of the waves and the gentle breeze lulled her into a state of relaxation. But as Mandy lay there, drifting in and out of a light nap, she suddenly heard a voice. It startled her, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a man standing a few feet away from her. He was in his 40s, he was overweight, and he looked disheveled. His clothes were wrinkled, and he smelled strongly of alcohol. Mandy felt a pang of unease, but she decided to be polite. She answered his initial questions, thinking that he might be a local just making conversation. The man asked her where she was from and if she came to the beach often. Mandy kept her answers short, hoping that he would just take the hint and leave. But instead of walking away, he actually sat down next to her on the sand. But then, his questions started to become more invasive, asking her about her family, if she was alone, and where she was staying. She felt very uncomfortable. She felt trapped, and she wasn't sure of how to extricate herself from the situation without causing a scene. This man's gaze was intense, and he seemed to be getting closer to her. Her instinct screamed danger, and she knew that she needed to get away. Mandy decided to leave. She packed up her things quickly, trying to remain calm at the same time. She stood up and then began walking towards the path that led back to the cottage. The man called out to her, trying to engage with her again, but she just ignored him and kept walking. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she quickened her pace. Soon, the man's calls turned into catcalls and then into threats. He was following her, and his tone had become menacing. Mandy's fear spiked and she broke into a run. She could hear his footsteps behind her, and she pushed herself to go faster. Luckily, given his build, he could not catch up to Mandy. He was very athletic, and of course, young and full of adrenaline. Mandy then reached the cottage, breathless and terrified. She rushed inside, locking the door behind her. She then leaned against it, just trying to catch her breath and calm her racing heart. She didn't tell anyone about what had happened because she didn't want to worry her family or ruin the vacation. Mandy just stayed away from the beach for the rest of their stay there. She pretended that everything was fine, but inside, she felt shaken. When the vacation ended and Mandy returned to school, she finally told me and a few close friends about what had happened. She recounted the story with a mix of fear and anger. She is frustrated that her safe place had been violated. We listened, horrified, and assured her that she had done the right thing by running away. Mandy said that she had learned her lesson and that she would never go to the beach alone again. Next time, she said she would bring us with her, ensuring that she was never in a vulnerable position like that again. We all promised to be there for her, to support her and help her reclaim her love for the beach. Mandy's experience serves as a warning to all of us to be cautious and aware of our surroundings, even in places that we think we are safe in. So, to the man on the beach, wherever you are and whoever you are, stay away from teenagers, you creep. I'm a 24-year-old female, and I moved into my first apartment by myself. I usually have roommates, but my last situation was being sexually harassed by two guys in my house, and also by a 60-year-old woman who was a severe alcoholic and drug addict. Long story short, I have been here for 2 months and it's been good. I love the place, the apartment, the location. But yesterday, I got the shit scared out of me when I received a knock on my door at 3 a.m. I live on the top floor of a 25-floor building and was the first to move in after renovations. So, there is only 4 to 5 people on my whole floor. I had no texts, not calls from anyone I knew about coming over. First, they knocked, and I went silent. They knocked again. It sounded like a man knocking. I called my mom telling her the situation and that I was utterly terrified being a young woman. They waited a few minutes, and then they knocked again. My mom called the police for me, and 2 women officers came up. I told them what had happened, and they were super kind about the situation. The only person who I could have maybe expected to knock was the only person who had access, the doorman. This doorman in particular has always had a very strange vibe to him. He never talked much, but he was always watching me. I would go to the elevators and he would get out of his chair to stare at me, waiting for them to open. He is somewhat a 28 to 32-year-old man. I'm not sure exactly how old, and he's a pretty tall African-American man. He'd always check me out, and while he wouldn't say much, he'd flirt. 2 days ago, I was going out with some girlfriends and I was dressed in a tight and short black dress with black boots. He seemed really interested in me at that point and definitely spent extra time staring at me, but I don't really think much of it. So after talking to the police, I went downstairs and I asked him, "Hey, so I got a knock on my door at 3 in the morning. Was that you by any chance?" And he immediately said yes, and that it was him. I was like, "Why are you knocking on my door at 3 a.m.? And he answered, "Well, it wasn't 3 a.m., it was like 2:30, and I was checking up on you." I asked him why, and he then mumbled something under his breath. I'm like, "What did you say?" And he said, I don't know." I gave him leeway and I said, "Because you thought I wasn't okay?" And he said, "Yeah." And I asked him why he would think that I wasn't okay. He then again said that he doesn't know, and I told him that it really scared me. I also told him, "I see you 3 to 4 times a day. Why couldn't you just talk to me down here?" And he then answered, "I don't know." Looking back, I also received a knock on my door at 12:30 a.m., but it was very faint, enough where I thought he was knocking on someone else's door. It was so weird. After I told him to not knock on my door again, he called me and he left a voicemail on my phone. I noticed the random number and realized that he called me at midnight at around 3 a.m. I was super scared because I live alone. Ring doorbells aren't allowed in the building unless requested. And also, the management company keeps hiring guys like this. The last guy was fired. I'd ideally like to actually end my lease, even if he gets fired, which he definitely will, considering the last guy, who wasn't nearly as bad, got fired. That would be good, but he knows where I live, what car I drive, when I come and go, and also has access to the magnets to get up the elevator. He even asked me a few days ago about my unit number. I am super scared and I hear stories about this all the time. I'm terrified that he will have a maintenance key or something and then he would come into my apartment and hide and wait for me to get home. A young girl was killed by someone who worked in her building. So, what do you think I should do? This happened about 6 years ago to me and my 2 other friends. I'm a 20-year-old female, but I was 14 at the time of this story and we were seeing the new Jumanji. This was my second time seeing it, but I was super excited because my mom had decided that I could finally start getting dropped off when I hung out with friends instead of her accompanying us. After she dropped us off, we went inside, got our tickets and snacks at the concessions, then went to decide where we wanted to sit. This was way before there was an assigned seating, and you could just sit wherever you wanted. Of course, being teens and wanting to be on our own, we sat in the back so we would not interrupt the other movie watchers with our snickering and our jokes. There weren't that many people there, maybe like 3 groups of kids and various other adults around them, but I did not pay much attention to them at all. We wanted to be on our own. And soon after we were settled, the trailer started, and that's when he walked in. I did not pay much attention to him then, but I still noted that he was the last person to enter the theater. I could still remember exactly how he looked to this day. He must have been in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. He was Caucasian, had dark eyes, reddish-brown hair, and a short beard. He was wearing running shoes, some jeans, and a white baseball hat, and a jacket over a t-shirt. He did a quick scan of the theater, and he stopped with his head in our direction, and then started making his way up the steps, all the while he remained fixated on us. We were 1 row from the very back, and he sat directly in front of us, right in front of my friend who was sat in the middle. This was the first more noticeable red flag. Soon after that, the movie started. I immediately tried to focus in on the movie, but not long after it started, the man started twisting his hat, so at times it faced forwards, then backwards on his head. That would have not been a problem if it wasn't for the fact that every time he adjusted his hat, he would completely turn his head to stare at us, then smirk for a few seconds and then turn back. It continued on like this for almost the entirety of the first half of the movie. He would then giggle to himself quietly, even if the movie was in no way comedic. The vibes were just so off on this guy, bordering on sinister. By then, I had completely lost interest in the movie, and I remained unfocused on what he was doing. And soon enough, he changed creep tactics, and every time the movie characters told a joke or said something remotely funny, he would full-on belly laugh and then turn around toward us while laughing and making direct eye contact with each of us. And after he probably got tired of that one, he would stand straight up and rotate to face us, smile creepily, and then sit back down. I was literally so tensed up that I had stopped eating my M&Ms, and now my friends had started exchanging uneasy glances with me, and I could tell that they were just uncomfortable as I am. I remember clearly my friend on the left just grabbing my arm as the movie was getting closer to the end and whispering my name nervously with widened eyes. I replied with, "I know, I've been watching him." I had decided to start coming up with a plan. I already knew that the employees here were unreliable, so I decided to trust the only other thing that I could think of without my mom there: women. It was almost the end of the movie, and I turned and grabbed both of my friends' arms and whispered to them as quietly as I could, "Guys, the moment the credit starts, I want y'all to run to the bathroom, and I'm going to call my mom to come in here and get us, okay?" They nodded, both looking as terrified and uneasy as I felt. About 5 minutes later, the credits started, and the moment they did, we fucking bolted as quietly as we could. Of course, in my mind, every horror movie scenario was playing in my head with me being the last to leave the row, so when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I decided to do the dumbest thing that I could have done. I stopped and I turned around as my friends ran ahead of me to the bathrooms. The theater was empty now, except for him in our row, crawling around and looking under the fucking seats. This felt like it lasted for a couple of minutes, but could not have been more than a couple of seconds. I was petrified. I couldn't move at that moment, but believe me, that I started moving again when his head popped up from the end of the row, and after a jerk motion scan of the room, his eyes focused on me. I swear, his eyes were so wide that I could see the whites from all the way down there. That's when he got up and started running, and so did I. I bolted out of there, skidding on the slick carpet, and shot my way to the women's bathroom, which was 4 theater entrances ahead of me. I could see my friend peeking out to the side of the entrance as I got closer. I noticed that my other friend was not accompanying her. After I could speak again and I was semi-breathing normally, we headed deeper into the stalls, and I shakily asked her where our friend went. She told me that instead of running into the bathroom, she shot off to the concessions where there are sometimes employees. This might have been my first option if I didn't know my theater well enough to know that it was a 50-50 chance for any employee to be there at that moment. We then calmed down a bit more, for we were now in the noisier and crowded bathrooms, surrounded by other people and adults. After like 4 minutes, we decided to take a peek out of the entrance to see if he was still there. And I kid you not, this motherfucker was pacing back and forth in front of the entrance with the most angry look on his face, staring directly at me when I poked my head out. I still don't know why I didn't tell any of the women around us what was happening. We finally called my mom, close to tears, and told her what was happening. She immediately left the store that she was at to come and pick us up, as she could hear that we were very upset. After waiting a minute more, we decided to take another look outside, and thank God he was gone. We saw our friend standing near the front of the theater next to an employee. Turns out, she had just been standing by the worker and watching the man run in my direction, then pace in front of the bathroom, then finally leave. She never said anything to the worker, which I thought was stupid then, and thinking back, it's even stupider. But we were dumb and young. We waited for my mom to get there around the employee who never said anything to us and was probably confused as hell. We finally saw her car pull up and we raced out to it and told her to drive out there quickly. After telling her what had happened, she told us that we were probably overreacting and he maybe thought that we were cute and that we were the ones who misunderstood the situation. I'm still kind of pissed at her for that. Very ignorant of a very knowledgeable and usually understanding woman. But maybe she was trying to comfort us. I don't know. All I know is that man did not have good intentions, and we had every right to be afraid as we were. Just thinking about it gives me the same goosebumps as I had in that theater. I know that if I saw him today, I would know exactly who he is. Stay safe. Always trust your instincts, even if you think that you're overreacting. They're usually right. I'm a 28-year-old male, and a few months ago, my life was pretty calm and predictable. I work as a software developer, and my days are usually spent coding, attending meetings, and troubleshooting issues. My job can be intense, but I do enjoy challenges. I live alone in a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and my routine was fairly straightforward. I've always been a bit of a night owl, often staying late at work to finish my projects or catch up on tasks. This means that I usually drive home at around 10 or 11 p.m. The drive is about 15 minutes long, mostly through well-lit but quiet suburban streets. I never really thought much about my commute. It was just part of my daily routine, something that I did without a second thought. But all of that changed one night. One evening, I left work a bit later than usual. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I got into my car and I started the drive home. The streets were mostly empty, and the only sounds were the hum of my engine and the occasional chirping of crickets. I felt the usual post-work fatigue, but I looked forward to unwinding with some TV before bed. As I turned onto a quieter street, I noticed a dark sedan behind me. Nothing unusual, just another late-night driver. I paid it no mind, and I continued on my way. But as I made a few more turns, heading deeper into my neighborhood, I realized that the sedan was still there behind me. It was just following at a steady distance. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe the driver lived nearby or was heading in the same direction as me. But the uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger with each turn that I made. I decided to test my theory by taking a few detours, turning onto random streets that I didn't usually take. And each time that I looked in my rearview mirror, the dark sedan was there, mirroring my every move. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was following me. I knew that I needed to lose the car. I didn't want whoever this was to know where I lived. I remembered the police station that was a few miles away. I don't know why I didn't think of that earlier. If I could just make it there, I knew that I would be safe. So I turned onto a main road and then I headed into the direction of the station. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly. As I drove, I saw a police car parked on the side of the road up ahead. I felt a surge of relief and I decided to stop beside it. I pulled over and parked next to the patrol car, hoping that the presence of law enforcement would deter the driver of the dark sedan. The dark sedan slowed down as it approached, and I held my breath, watching to see what it would do. And after a moment, it then sped up and then drove off, disappearing into the night. The police car had scared him off. Well, at least for now. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to calm myself down. The police officer in the patrol car noticed me and came over to check if everything was all right. I explained what had happened and I gave a description of the dark sedan. The officer took my information and promised to keep an eye out for the car. He also called it in and told them the direction that the car went off to. I felt a sense of relief, but also frustration. The man in the dark sedan had been scared off, but who knows if he would come back or not. To be honest, I said man, but I really have no idea if it was a man or a woman. But what I do know is that I needed to take extra precautions to ensure my safety. Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to change my routine. I started varying my routes home, taking different streets, and occasionally driving to a friend's house before heading back to my apartment. I also adjusted my work hours, leaving earlier or later to avoid a predictable schedule. I continued to keep a close eye on my surroundings, always checking my mirrors and being aware of any cars that seemed to follow me for too long. Safe to say, I'm not a fan of dark sedans right now. So far, I haven't seen the car again, but I will continue to stay vigilant. Stay safe, everyone. Hello, everyone. This happened all yesterday, and I am still very anxious about the whole situation. Well, I was sitting with my boyfriend and my 4-month-old daughter in the train to Paris. On each side were 4 seats, and my boyfriend and I were sitting on one side, and on the other side there was a man in his 50s. He was acting since the beginning a bit weird, mumbling stuff and so on, but I just ignored him as I was a bit exhausted from the travel. He smiles seeing my daughter and says something in French. He was French. Then, I hear noise, like a noise when someone is taking a picture. I was surprised and I thought that it was the grandma sitting on the other side, near the man taking a picture. So, I let it pass because I know that especially grandmas go crazy when they see babies, and this might be like an innocent picture. But then, my boyfriend who is in front of me tells me that it was the man, and he is visibly uncomfortable. I also started to feel a bit unwell because he was like very creepy. Then, my baby starts crying, and after trying to calm her down, I give her to my boyfriend to also try to find out what she needs. Then, the man just takes another picture of our daughter. My boyfriend confronted him and asked him if he was taking pictures. He said no, but he clearly was. He said that he was calling his sister, but the hand movement wasn't as he was trying to call. He was looking behind the phone turned in the direction of my daughter, and after a few seconds, every time checking the phone and doing it again. He then showed us a random chat as to prove that he didn't do anything. He said if my boyfriend had a problem, then they would talk at the train station in Paris. I asked myself why he didn't show us his gallery with all the pictures. This was strange to me. Then he said that he was just making selfies of himself. Time passes, and he then starts doing it again. At this point, I leave with my daughter and I go to find a person who controls our tickets to ask to change seats and tell them what is happening. They give us some new seats very far away from our old ones. We describe the man and they tell us that they will handle it. But then, we see the man coming and he goes to the toilet that's near us, although he shouldn't have to go that far from his seat. I was scared. It was like he was looking for us and where we were. The ticket collector goes after him and asks him what he is doing there. I don't know what he said, but his gestures were wild. He then goes back to his seat, I guess. But after a while, he comes back and goes near us, This happens like 5 times, and I was absolutely terrified now. He had a little purse with him, and my imagination went like crazy. The ticket collector went after him every time and asked him if he was looking for something and warned him to stop. At first, he didn't listen, but then we didn't see him anymore. What was he doing? Does someone know what his intentions were? After we arrived at the station, we ran like crazy to catch another train quickly because we were scared that he was still following us. I, a mid-20s female, went to the local grocery store tonight at around 5 p.m. It's winter and it's getting dark by 5 p.m. where I live. I was in an aisle taking my time deciding between the options when this late 20s, early 30s looking guy with light features, glasses, and a scruffy beard comes up right next to me and just stands there. I didn't think much of it or even look at him at first because I figured, whatever, he's just looking too, you know. But then, after a few seconds, I noticed that he wasn't moving or doing anything. He was just standing there. So I looked at him and he was already staring at me. And for a half second, I thought that he might say something to me. So I stood there for a second just looking back at him. He didn't say anything, so I just turned and fast walked away. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, that was weird, but whatever. Probably just an awkward guy who doesn't know how to talk to women. Then, not 30 seconds later, I'm in another aisle and I see him out of the corner of my eye, coming down the aisle I'm in, again, staring right at me. So again, I walked away as fast as I could and just went right to the self-checkout. While I was at the self-checkout, I'm looking over my shoulders the whole time, making sure that he isn't behind me anymore, and he's not. I start walking out of the store, relieved that, once again, I was just being paranoid and I wasn't ever in any real danger. But as I am walking out, I decide to look behind me one more time, and there he is, right freaking behind me. I then notice that he has nothing in his hands, no groceries, and he's heading toward the door right on my heels. Without even thinking, I just stop dead in my tracks. I look right at him again, and he's already looking at me. And then he puts his head down looking at his phone, and then walks past me out the door. He bought nothing from the store. I am so scared at this point that my head is spinning. I don't know what to do. I can see my car because I parked close to the exit, thank goodness. So I call my fiancé and I sprint as fast as I can to my car. I then jump in, lock the doors, and start looking for this guy. And then I see him. He is aimlessly walking around the parking lot through the cars. He is pretty far away from me at this point, and I have my fiancé on the phone, so I'm feeling somewhat safe again. I watched him walk around for another few seconds before I got out of there. I have no idea what this guy was doing or what his motive could have been. Maybe he was just a weird dude who doesn't know how to talk to girls? Or maybe he was a predator with dangerous intentions? Or maybe he thought that I would look easy prey for a robbery. The thing I really can't wrap my head around is the fact that each time that I noticed him, he was already staring at me. He was not discreet at all, and I would think a dangerous predator might be a little more inconspicuous. He also didn't buy anything from the grocery store, which I also couldn't understand. I was in the store about 5 minutes before I noticed him, so I'm sure he didn't follow me in the store. Am I being paranoid? There's a lot that didn't feel right, so I'm having a really hard time trying to rationalize this experience. But it was definitely a creepy encounter. Back when I was 17 years old, I was enjoying my summer break before my senior year of high school. I lived in a small town where nothing much ever happened. My days were mostly spent hanging out with friends, working a part-time job at the local ice cream shop, and lounging by the pool in the backyard. Looking back, those were some of the most peaceful days of my life. But all good things must come to an end. One evening when I was home alone, half paying attention to the TV while scrolling through Instagram, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I usually ignore this kinds of calls, they're usually telemarketers. But because my friend said that he got a new number but hadn't given it to me yet, I decided to answer this one, thinking that it might be him. There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by a faint, almost whispering voice. I couldn't make out what the other person was saying, and they hung up after a few seconds. I brushed it off as a prank, and I just went back to watching TV. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming, all the same unintelligible muttering from the same unknown number. I started to feel annoyed more than anything. I figured that it was some kind of kid from school messing with me. At first, I just declined the calls, but as they kept coming, the more annoyed I got. As the days went by, the calls became more frequent, sometimes happening several times a day. I would try my best to ignore it, but it was just becoming too overwhelming. At that time, I didn't know you had the option to block or silence unknown numbers. So what I did was just put my phone on silent instead so I don't hear it ring. Only to see multiple missed calls from this unknown number when I opened my phone back up. Sometimes, I would answer the call though, and I would scream at whoever was calling, telling them to fuck off. I didn't know any better at that time or how stupid that could be, but I was young, and I assumed that the person in the other line was just some dumb prank caller trying to get on my nerves. Over time, when I did answer and not scream at the person, I noticed that the voice on the other end started to become clearer. It was a man's voice, and after finally being able to understand him, I learned what he was saying. He talked about me, my personal life, details that no stranger should know. He mentioned my name, my school, and even the color of the shirt that I was wearing. Well, my annoyance and anger turned to fear. Someone was watching me. I had no idea who it was. At that point, I started to get paranoid. Every shadowy corner is a potential hiding place for a stalker. I started going out only when I needed to, in fear of the phone man following me. When I did go out, I became hyper aware of my surroundings. Every time I stepped out of my house, I felt like I was being watched by someone that I couldn't see. And sure enough, this feeling turned out to be true. I started to notice a black car that seemed to be everywhere I went. It was never too close. It was parked a few houses down in the morning, and I also saw it in the parking lot at my job. It was just far enough away that you won't recognize or pay attention to it unless you were a paranoid individual looking for a stalker like me. I wanted to take immediate action, but I told myself that it might just be a coincidence, that I shouldn't jump the gun on the wrong person. My stalker would surely notice that I was looking for him. The calls kept coming, and my desperation grew. The details the caller knew about me were too accurate to ignore, accurate and up-to-date too. He could tell me what color shirt I wore on my way to work, what I ate for lunch, and much, much more. I began to feel like I was living in a nightmare. My safe, quiet town no longer felt like anything other than a hunting ground, and I was the prey in it. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I also can't figure out why I didn't tell my parents about it. One evening, while I was out with my friends, I received another call. This time, the voice on the other end was angry, accusing me of ignoring them and threatening to come find me. My heart raced. I couldn't understand what was going on. This person was stalking me, calling me, threatening me, and I just couldn't understand why and who they were. I knew, though, that I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I needed to do something. I went to the police and I reported the calls. They took my statement and said that they would look into it. But without any concrete evidence or a way to trace the calls, there wasn't much that they could do. I had a small sliver of hope when I went to report the guy, but it all slipped away when I heard the cops tell me that they couldn't do anything about it. And all I could think of in that moment was that he knows. He will know. He will know that I went to the cops. I did not sleep that night, nor the following one. A few days later, I was walking home from my part-time job when I saw the black car again. It was parked at the end of the street. I hadn't been sleeping well, and in my sleep-deprived mind, the best idea that I got was to try and confront him. Well, at that time, I didn't know if that was him or not. My desperation and hazy mind convinced me in that moment that it was him, and that I had to confront him to put an end to this. I know, looking back at it now, that was an extremely dangerous and stupid decision to make. But I was young, desperate, and stressed. So, I walked to the car. As I got closer, I noticed a figure sitting inside watching me. My heart pounded in my chest and I felt a surge of adrenaline. But as I approached, the car then sped off, leaving me standing there shaking and confused. Who is this person? Why are they targeting me? I then went home and I locked all the doors and windows. The calls continued, and the threats became more explicit. The caller described my house, my daily routine, and even specific things in my bedroom that were visible through my window. I felt violated and helpless. I kept my windows closed, my curtains closed, and my parents were starting to notice my anxiety. I didn't want to worry them. One night, I received a call that pushed me to my breaking point. The caller said that they were outside my house and described the exact outfit that I was wearing. I ran to the window and I saw the black car parked across the street. I felt a wave of terror and I knew that I couldn't stay there any longer. My parents were not home at that time, so what I did is that I grabbed my keys and I ran out the back door, heading to my friend Sarah's house a few blocks away. I looked over my shoulder the whole way, half expecting the car to follow me. When I arrived, I broke down in tears and told Sarah everything. She convinced me to go back to the police again and tell them about the latest threats, and to also tell them about this black car that I keep seeing. This time, the police took immediate action. They sent a patrol car to my house and promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood. I felt a small sense of relief, but he's still out there, and he can still get to me if he wants to. So I just stayed at my friend Sarah's house that night because I was afraid to go back home. The next day, the police called me with some news. They had found the black car parked near my house and questioned the driver. He was a middle-aged man with a history of stalking and harassment. Upon taking his phone for evidence, they noted multiple calls to my number as well as a rope and a pair of handcuffs in his car. He was arrested and charged for stalking, harassment, and plots of kidnapping. Hearing this news, I felt a wave of relief come over me. It's as if all the energy and adrenaline in my body immediately stopped and I buckled to my knees, and as much as I hate to admit it, I cried. I cried so hard. The entirety of the events were playing in my mind, and my friends comforted me, telling me that it was over. I went back home, but the experience had left a mark on me. When my parents came home from their trip, I then told them everything that had happened, and they were extremely sad that I had to face this all alone. They had a stern talk to me about being more open and asking for help from them because they said that they were my parents and that they will always be there to support me and protect me. We took extra precautions to ensure my safety. We had cameras set up around the house, and they also made sure that I was never alone going to and from work. Over time, the fear began to fade, but I was still feeling uncomfortable whenever I went out because I always felt that I had to be on guard. So I went into therapy, and I'm still in the process of it. My friends and family are there to support me every step of the way. So, the only thing I got from this experience is that whenever something is wrong or something makes you uncomfortable, don't be scared to speak up. Ask for help. Tell your parents, tell your friends. And to that sick man who stalked me, wherever you are, I do hope you're in prison. Let's not meet ever again. I'm a female, and this happened many years ago when I was 15. I live in a small Midwestern town that had very little crime, and I always felt safe even at night. I lived just a few blocks from downtown, and I would often walk or ride my bike there to pick up a soda, some candy, or on this particular evening, a pack of cigarettes. I know, I was way too young to be smoking, but there it is. So I get my cigs and I start walking back home. By this time, it was starting to get dark out, but that doesn't bother me at all. That is, until I pass a cross street and a guy steps out from the shadows and then starts following me. Even then, I wasn't scared. I was just aware that he was walking behind me and was getting closer. I sped up a little and so did he. Pretty soon, this guy is like 3 or 4 steps behind me, and then he asked me for a cigarette. Being a dumb kid who was raised to be polite, I gave him one. And then he asked for a light and I gave him that too. Then, I rapidly start walking away because this guy is starting to give me the creeps. He had long, greasy hair, and the way that he looked at me made me feel very uncomfortable. It was like he was looking at his dinner plate and was deciding what to eat first. So, I'm skedaddling up the street, which is now going up a big hill, where I hear the guy's footsteps starting to run towards me. I was already slightly out of breath from fast walking up this hill, and I know I'll never be able to outrun this guy. So I just keep on walking and hope that this guy will jog right past me. Well, nope. Next thing I know, the guy has grabbed me from behind with one arm around my waist, pinning both arms to my sides and the other around my neck. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was mad. How dare he? I realize that we are on a residential street, so I tell the guy that I am going to start screaming my head off while I begin stomping on his feet as hard as I could. He hesitates for a moment, then lets me go and then jogs further up the hill, disappearing behind a bush at the top of the hill. I cross the street to walk on the opposite side of the bushes that he went behind, and I keep my eyes locked on those bushes all the way down the block. By now, I am only another block from home, and I break into a sprint and then dash home. Of course, I never told my parents about what happened because I was afraid of getting in trouble for smoking and that they wouldn't believe me. Turns out that several weeks later, this guy grabbed another girl and then beat and raped her. I didn't find this out until years later when I saw his picture in the paper for being on trial for rape. I think I was his first attempt, and he got scared when I fought back. I am so grateful that it was the fight response that kicked in for me that night, and it wasn't the freeze response. I was a very, very lucky kid. Before I start, I must say that I haven't told many people this, mostly because it was a very scary experience for me. This happened in Kelowna, Canada in the 80s. I was about 14 at that time, and I was babysitting at a neighbor's house while the parents were gone. They had a nice house, like most in the neighborhood, and it was right on the corner where two streets connected. My house was right outside a bus stop across from theirs. This happened pretty late at night in the winter, so it was dark out, maybe 11 or 12 at night. I was sitting on the couch when I thought I saw something out the back door. It was one of those glass doors that led to a porch. It was weird though because I couldn't see much. You know when the lights are on and it's dark out, so you can't see anything but black in your reflection? That's what I saw. But I could have sworn that it looked like something was there. So I got up and I walked close to the window. It definitely looked like something was there, but I couldn't see what it was. I got closer and I still couldn't see it. I honestly should have just turned on the lights, but instead, I put my face right to the glass and I cupped my hands by my eyes to look out. Maybe about 1 inch from my face on the other side of the glass was a man. He looked tall and pale from what I could see, and he was staring at me very scarily. Keep in mind, he would have been watching from the backyard. And naturally, I jumped back and I let out a short scream. Being stupid teenage me, I didn't call the cops. I called my parents instead. My father then came over to take a look. There were still footprints in the front and backyard, and I don't remember much after that because it just felt like a very unreal experience. You never expect this stuff to happen to you until it does. Anyways, I just hope that you enjoyed this story because I sure didn't enjoy experiencing it. Hi there. So this was something that happened to me when I was traveling alone. I had lost my partner of 8 years after a long battle with an illness that they had, which caused me to take some time off to try and heal and find myself again. I decided that during the spring break, I would move from Mass back to my home state of Oklahoma to be close to my mother again. On my way there, I made some planned stops at places that my partner and I enjoyed or were memorable for us as a way to honor them. One of those places was a state park. We were both avid outdoorsy people and we loved camping, hiking, and just being one with the nature. And this particular park had strong memories, so I knew that I had to go. Once I got there, I called my mom to let her know that I was there. I then stuffed my phone and keys in my backpack, and then I marched on. The sight was beautiful, especially early mornings in spring, when you could still see the dew sitting on top of the grass and kind of hanging above the rocks. I was able to just take in the sights and let anything out that I needed. A woman I was passing actually snapped a great picture of me by an overhang that I still have to this day. I saw a few people on my hike who were all willing to share their stories and wished me well on my journey. It truly was a therapeutic experience for me. I was and always will be a very giving person and willing to help those in need that I come across too. So when I made eye contact with a man that seemed a bit distraught or maybe just overwhelmed, I stopped and asked if he was okay. When I approached him sitting on the edge of this cliff with his feet dangling, I noticed a very strong alcoholic smell. He said he was fine but just asked if I had water. I always carried an extra bottle, so I just gave him the whole thing, telling him to keep it. If that man was out there drinking, he was going to need the water. I don't know how many people would have stopped for him, let alone give him water, so I did. He thanked me, and we had a small conversation. He told me he used to go there with his parents when he was younger, and that he was just struggling at that time. I don't want to make it too mushy, but I tried my best at a small inspirational speech for him, to which he seemed to cheer up a bit. He then asked me if I was single or if I wanted to go get drinks, to which I politely declined. I didn't want to bring up my partner, but I just said that I wasn't looking for anyone at that time. He shrugged it off and seemed to handle it well by laughing. We then shook hands and wished each other well, and I carried on my path. At one point, I stopped at a small stream and splashed some water on my face and rested. And while sitting there, I started getting a feeling like I was being watched. This was a bit off the path, so I rarely saw people over there. I looked around and I confirmed that no one was around, so I assumed that it was either just me or maybe there was an animal. I was, after all, in their territory, so I decided that it would be best to move along. I got back to the path, and after a bit, that following feeling came back. I again looked behind me and I didn't see anyone, but the feeling just wouldn't go away. My instincts were starting to kick in and overwhelm me, so I sporadically made the decision to break into a run to see what would happen. It was probably a stupid idea if it was an animal, but I really just wanted the feeling to go away. And after a bit, I slowed down to catch my breath and I again looked around. I was not seeing anyone, but this time, I heard heavy breathing. That path is not easy if you don't take steep inclines like that on a regular basis. So, I looked around a little closer and walked back towards a large boulder. On the other side was the same guy that I saw earlier. When I saw him, I didn't know what to do other than ask if he was okay again. He again chuckled and said yes, but seemed like he meant it more this time. I asked him if he was following me in a joking manner, to which he replied that he wasn't intentionally, but just wanted to catch up to me to thank me again because it meant a lot to him. I told him that it was no big deal at all and I was glad to help. And after some awkward standing around, I then said that I had to get going. He waved me on and I headed out thinking that it was a bit awkward, but at least that was solved and over with. But as I made my way to a part the loops around, I started getting the same feeling of being watched. I was a bit less worried this time, expecting it to be the same guy again, but saying that I was a bit annoyed sounds too harsh, but I'm not sure how else to put it. I wanted this experience to release any emotions that I had been holding back. Yeah, I had stopped and talked to a few people, but I wasn't really here to meet new people. I wanted to be able to continue this journey on my own. I continued on this time, thinking maybe if I didn't stop to pay attention to him, then I wouldn't have any more run-ins. Yet, because this circled around, we ended up walking towards each other. This time, I just smiled at him and I tried to keep walking. But I was startled when he grabbed my arm. I never experienced anything like this, so I didn't know what to do but look at him. He told me again that what I said really meant a lot to him and he wanted to make it up to me. I told him that it wasn't necessary as I was just being nice. I tried pulling my arm away as I said this, but he only held it tighter. I started becoming a bit scared for obvious reasons, and he picked up on this as he looked at me, smiled, and asked, "Are you scared?" That made me sick to my stomach. There was no one else around in this secluded area but us. What was he planning? Why would he even say something like that? While choking back tears, I managed to just say please let go of my arm. After a few more seconds of staring at me and smiling, he finally let go and started laughing. I didn't waste any more time and I quickly ran. I was familiar with the path and I knew that I still had a bit to go before I got back to the entrance. But I remembered that there was a small opening in the trees to a field with a few benches where families typically stopped and then took pictures or had lunch. I was praying that I would run into some people and that hopefully I would be able to just walk near them so I wasn't alone. And thankfully I did come across the spot, and there were a few people there. I tried to calm down and look like I was just there to rest, as I didn't want anyone to be worried about me. I sat up at the bench and I looked around worried that he would show up and then cause another scene, but thankfully he never did. After some time, I was able to calm down and try to enjoy the last bit of my trek. I was obviously upset. This was supposed to be a time for me to heal and then move on with my life. And while this was pretty terrifying, I refused to let this ruin it for me. I gathered myself and I headed back to the entrance by myself. I started a brisk walk until I was back into my jog, until I finally reached the entrance. I stopped by the restrooms to freshen up before I was ready to head back to my car. But as I exited the restroom, I, of course, would make eye contact with this same guy heading into the shop. But he looked slightly different. He had lost the old dirty jacket that he was wearing, and the jeans he was wearing now looked like it had been cut at the knees. Could he have changed into them? Quite possibly, but since they seemed jagged and uneven, they looked intentionally and sporadically cut. And of course, as soon as he noticed me, he stopped and turned like he was about to walk towards me. This time, I wasn't going to be the scared little girl. I rolled my eyes and I immediately turned around to walk to my car with my keys clenched between my fingers, and I heard someone shout, "Hey!" from behind me, but I didn't stop. I didn't even turn around until I heard the footsteps getting faster, causing me to run as well. I managed to get to my car, get in, lock it as he finally caught up and started pulling on my car handle. When he realized that it was locked, he became enraged. He kept screaming to open the door and he was banging on my window and kicking it. It didn't last long before a ranger noticed and came rushing up to us as well, but he then took off. They didn't catch him, but he did stupidly run backwards into the park, so he would have to leave eventually. The ranger asked me what happened and I agreed to stay to tell an officer. Throughout this whole time, they never found the guy, so I ended up leaving and giving them my contact information if they had any other questions for me. I left there, relieved for multiple reasons. Relieved that I would never see that man again, but also relieved that I made it through the trail alone for the first time. It felt like a weight being lifted off me, like I was being tested and I passed it, and it would just make me stronger. I even got a call from the officer telling me that they did catch the guy, and since the rangers saw him, I didn't have to come back to identify him. They also told me that he had warrants, so he went back with them anyway. Overall, I felt like the trip was successful and I was already feeling better. I'm not going to say it made me more suspicious of people, as I still look for the best in others, but I am also mentally stronger and know how to handle situations better, both physically and mentally. And to the guy that stalked me that day, I hope that you are truly doing better. Yesterday, I was at the mall around closing time. I was browsing for some cosmetic products in the makeup aisle with my friend until I realized that there was this one strange man who had like a mischievous ass look on his face, whom kept walking past the same aisle that I was in. 5 to 6 different times, he was staring at us every single time. I don't think anything of it yet besides a weird vibe, and me and my friend tried to test something out by going into a whole different section of the store. When we went to where the birthday cards were, I saw him in the corner of my eye, so I told my friend to keep walking. We then reached the other end of the store where the pet supplies are, and he was still there. There, cornering the main entrance of the aisle. At that point, I whispered to my friend and we immediately speed walked out. And when we did, I still saw him following us, so I turned around to speak up, but when I did, he was just staring at me. I didn't break eye contact because I wanted to say something to this man, but my mind went blank. Once we reached the checkout, and I see he's waiting right behind us, but not quite at the checkout. He was behind and beside the entrance of the checkout. At this point, my friend noticed and I was about to freak the fuck out. We stood there for around 15 to 20 minutes waiting to see if he would leave, and he never did. So, after that time markup was up, we decided to just hold hands and then run up the escalators and make our way to the upper level exit. We both were running for our dear lives, but once I went through the gate in front of the exit, my friend immediately grabbed me back and I didn't realize why. Until seeing the guy had somehow got into the door before us, which had to have been impossible because we ran before he did. We never even saw him running or heard anyone running. However, we did get escorted out by an older group of men and women who overheard me and my friend freaking out about the situation. They confronted him, but I never got to hear anything any of them said. He asked the group of people, "Are you sure you guys are with these people?" And after they confirmed, he left, and someone a part of the group said something about him allegedly lying about being some sort of undercover employee. So, I've been listening to scary story channels for ages, and I've always been a skeptical believer in all the stories. I feel like some of them are certainly fiction, but others sound more true than others. But I've always looked at them all as probably made up. But that changed recently because I had something happen to me that I would have listened to and immediately thought that it was fiction. It's not super eventful, it's actually pretty straightforward, but it was seriously weird and is legitimately the stuff of nightmares. It was a regular Wednesday night to begin with, and I had woken up somewhere around 3 to what I would say was the most annoying feeling in the back of my throat. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with your throat feeling like the Sahara and you absolutely have to go downstairs and down half a gallon of water? Yeah, it was one of those nights. It was my own fault though. I had eaten a whole bag of pretzels, and I knew that the amount of sodium that I had consumed was probably close to fatal. I grumbled to myself, not wanting to leave the comfort of my bed. But after a few minutes of trying to ignore it and go back to sleep, I sighed and I relented. I stumbled my way down the stairs in the dark, nearly eating the hardwood floor in the hallway at the bottom. I made my way to the kitchen and grabbed a glass from the cabinet and then walked over the sink. Now, like a lot of kitchens, there's a big window over it that faces out in the backyard, and at night, it's pretty much pitch black. There's a small light on the shed that's on the far left side, but that's about it. Normally, I wouldn't even bother looking out back, or would and wouldn't think twice about seeing nothing. But this time, something actually did catch my eye. Right there, in the middle of my backyard was a figure. Well, not a figure like something I couldn't make out. It was a person, just standing there. Seeing someone in my yard was enough to startle me in and of itself. But the creepiest part was that this person was wearing a mask. This mask was terrifying. It had a weird twisted jaw with spiked teeth that was stretched out, and the eyes were hollow and dark, And really, it was just terrifying. Now, my brain made me stand there and just kind of stare at this person wearing a weird mask that was just standing in my backyard for several moments. At first, I thought that I was hallucinating or dreaming, or that I was just seeing something else and only thinking that it was a person with a mask. But as I sipped my water, watching this person watching me, my mind finally clicked into drive and I realized that I was staring at a person wearing a creepy mask standing in my backyard. Like, this was not a normal thing to see at 3 in the morning. I started freaking out at this point and I dashed back up the stairs to put on my pants and grab my phone on my way down. I had 911 already dialed and I ran back to my window. But I was surprised to see that the person was gone. The backyard was back to being empty and there was zero trace of this masked person. I already dialed 911 at this point, and the operator was asking me where the emergency was, and I didn't want to just say, "Oh, never mind, I'm just crazy." So I explained to her that I saw a person in a mask in my backyard, but that they seemed to have left. She was a bit confused, but I explained that I saw them, and when I went to grab my phone, they had disappeared. And after explaining things like the idiot that I am, she reassured me that they would send a unit to drive around the neighborhood. After I got off the phone with her, I stayed downstairs and I just kind of watched out the front window, feeling paranoid and creeped out. After a while, the police had pulled up to my house and knocked on my door, and I opened it to speak with them. The officer asked me a few questions, mostly about what I saw. I explained to him the guy with the mask, and I described what they were wearing to the best of my abilities. I could tell by the look on the officer's face that he was as confused as I was, and he even said that it was really strange, and then asked if it was okay that they look around on my property. I told them that I had no issue with that. After a few minutes, they had actually come back to the door, and the officer asked me if my gate had been broken, and I looked at him like, "Huh?" He motioned for me to come out, and sure enough, my gate was busted. The fence was wooden and the gate was fairly large, and the latch had been completely pulled from the wood, like pried out with a crowbar or something. I told him that no, that it wasn't broken like that before. And he then told me to stay there while he checked the backyard out real quick, just in case. They looked around for a few moments, and when he came back, he asked me if what he'd found was the mask that I had seen. It was. It was that same creepy-ass mask that the person was wearing. After that, they seemed to take this a bit more seriously and asked me if they could come in and if I could give them an official statement. They then came in, took my statement, and they gave me the report information for the insurance company since the gate was destroyed, and then they left, telling me to call them again if I saw anything else. I have no idea if they ever found anything past this, as they never contacted me about it. A couple of days have passed and I kind of relaxed about what had happened. Until one day when I came home from work, and I saw a crumpled piece of paper in front of my door. It was just a normal looking paper crumpled, nothing too old or creepy. So I decided to open it up, and on that paper was a single line that drained all the blood from my face. It said, "I'm always watching you." I know that this sounds like some creepy event from some dumb B-rated horror movie, and I would have had that same thought had I read or heard the story. But I lived it. I did contact the police and gave them the note, but nothing further has happened since. What did happen was enough to be terrifying to me though. I was paranoid, and I would watch the backyard sometimes an entire night. Now, when I go to bed, I double check all the locks, and the gate that I had installed is reinforced way better than the old one. I have no idea how they pried the gate open or why they did it, but they did. I also don't know what they meant about the sentence that they wrote on the paper. Are they pranking me? Do I have a stalker? Is this some kind of sick joke that someone is playing on me? I don't know. But I have also installed a floodlight that is motion activated that shines into the backyard, just in case that I wake up at 3 in the morning again and I feel the need to look outside. My name is Tracy, and I'm 24 years old, and I live in the bustling city of Seattle, Washington. I have always loved the vibrant energy of the city, with its coffee culture and the ever-present drizzle that somehow adds to its charm. My story begins in the place that I find solace in, Starbucks. It was a typical rainy afternoon. I decided to treat myself to a caramel macchiato at the Starbucks on Pike Street. Since I wasn't in a hurry, I grabbed my coffee and I found a cozy seat by the window, just enjoying the ambience and watching people bustle by. As I sipped my coffee, a guy approached me. He looked to be in his late 20s with dark hair, a set of piercing blue eyes, and a chiseled jawline. He wore a well-fitted leather jacket and smelled of subtle masculine cologne. He asked if he could join me, and I couldn't help but be drawn to his charming smile and confident demeanor. Being single and, ready to mingle, I was open to new experiences, so I said yes. His name was Alex, and we immediately hit it off. He was witty, kind, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We exchanged numbers before parting ways. We started texting, and later on, Alex and I started going on dates, and each one felt like a dream. We had picnics at Gasworks Park, enjoying romantic dinners at quaint little restaurants, and we took long walks along the waterfront. He was always attentive, holding open doors for me and making sure that I was comfortable. He had a way of making me feel special, and I soon found myself falling for him. Our dates were filled with laughter and deep conversations. He seemed perfect, the kind of guy that I have always dreamed of. And after a few months, we decided to make things official. Alex became my boyfriend, and for the first 3 months, he was everything that I could ever want. He was sweet, caring, and always made time for me. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. But after 3 months, things started to change with Alex. He became cold and distant. When we went on dates, he would often ignore me and he's just glued to his phone. Conversations that once flowed so easily became strained and awkward. I tried to brush it off, thinking that he might just be stressed with work, but his behavior persisted and it was really hurting me. At the same time, he also became controlling. Ironic, right? Whenever I went out with friends, he would bombard me with calls and texts, accusing me of cheating or lying about my whereabouts. The sweet, attentive guy that I fell for seemed to disappear, replaced by someone that I barely recognize. Yet, after these episodes, he would suddenly shower me with affection, apologizing profusely, giving me flowers, gifts, and then promising to change. But then, after everything is alright, he then goes back to being cold and distant, and then the cycle begins again. I just couldn't get it, like if I was with him, I would get ignored, but when I wasn't with him, he would turn into this controlling, clingy monster. Well, I reached my breaking point and I decided to end the relationship. Alex couldn't understand what he did wrong though. He became angry during the breakup. He was screaming and he was throwing things around my apartment. I had never seen him so enraged. He broke the picture frame and knocked over a lamp. Like, what the hell? This was a side to him that I was never expecting at all. A good thing that he was showing it this early, though. But at that moment, I was extremely terrified, so I called the police. The police then arrived and managed to calm him down, and then they escorted him out of my apartment. Things were silent for a week, and I hoped that that was the end of it. All that I had to do right now was to move on and let go of him. But guess what? I was wrong. Alex showed up at my door with flowers, asking me to take him back. I explained that it was over and that I couldn't continue in a relationship that made me feel unsafe. He threw the flowers on the ground and just stormed out, and I thought that that would be the last that I would see of him. And you know what? I was wrong again. Alex began stalking me. He called and texted me constantly, begging for another chance, and then turning angry when I didn't respond. I started seeing his car parked near my apartment, and he would follow me to work and other places I frequented. I was hanging out with friends once, and we saw him sitting and drinking at another table all by himself, just staring at me. This guy that I once fell in love with was seriously freaking me out. One night, I was walking home from the grocery store when I noticed him trailing behind me. My heart pounded with fear as I quickened my pace. I was so desperate to get home and just to get away from him. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I was constantly looking over my shoulder and feeling unsafe in my own city. The situation reached its climax though one night when I was asleep. I woke up to the sound of banging on my door. I checked the time, and it was 2 a.m. It was Alex outside. He was shouting and he was demanding to be let in. He said that he just wanted to talk, but I was terrified. So I grabbed my phone ready to call the police when I saw red and blue lights flashing through the window. The police arrived, and it turned out that my neighbors had called them after hearing the disturbance. They took Alex away and I filed a police report. The ordeal left me shaken, but I was grateful for my neighbors and the swift response of the police. In the aftermath, I had to file a restraining order against him. I also took more steps to protect myself. I changed my phone number, I installed security cameras, and I took self-defense classes. If I had ignored the red flags in my relationship, things could have ended much, much worse. So, yeah, that's my story. My encounter with a charming stranger turned stalker taught me a valuable lesson about trust, safety, and resilience. I hope my experience serves as a cautionary tale and offers some comfort to others who might be going through similar situations. Please stay safe and always trust your instincts. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.